The night was quiet thick with the damp breath of the Brookdale marshes. Crickets sang in the distance, and the steady hum of the river's current filled the darkness. In a modest mobile home, a light suddenly flared in the kitchen, casting long, thin shadows across the linoleum floor. At exactly 3:37 a.m., a call pierced the silence. A trembling voice spoke first, hurried and high-pitched. My little girl is gone. I just woke up and she's not here. The back door is open. Please, send someone." The dispatcher asked questions in a calm, trained rhythm, but the answers were scattered, confusing. The woman on the line said her name was Misty Ward, only 17 years old. She was supposed to be watching a 5-year-old girl named Aria Bennett while Aria's father, Ethan, worked the night shift at the docks. Through the phone, the dispatcher could hear the panic of another voice in the background, a man shouting incoherently, raw with grief. That was Ethan just arriving home and finding his daughter missing. Misty's tone, by contrast, was oddly flat, almost detached. She gave details mechanically: the open door, a brick propped beneath it, the empty mattress where the child should have been. Officers were dispatched immediately. Within minutes, the quiet street would erupt in flashing blue and red lights, neighbors emerging in pajamas, and the first wave of search dogs unleashed into the dark. But even then, as the call echoed through the dispatch center, something felt wrong. The timing didn't add up. The fear sounded uneven, broken. This was not just a missing child. This was the beginning of a story that would grip Brookdale for 16 years and reveal how silence can bury the truth deeper than the marshes themselves. Before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe and support this channel. Your engagement helps bring awareness to stories like this and protect vulnerable children everywhere. Misty Ward claimed it began like any other evening. She said Aria had been restless after dinner, running around the narrow trailer while her younger brother slept on a thin mattress in the corner. Ethan had left for his night shift just before 6, kissing both children quickly before heading out into the chilly February night. By 8, Misty had tucked the children into their makeshift beds. The entire family slept in one cramped room, bare except for 2 small mattresses and a dresser missing its bottom drawer. Aria had been given a thin blanket after Misty said her usual pink nightshirt was in the laundry. Misty insisted that she herself lay down by 10, exhausted. The details, however, would later shift each time she retold them. At first, she said she fell asleep quickly, that nothing disturbed her until 3 in the morning. Later, she claimed she had been awake off and on, restless. Investigators would note these inconsistencies, but for now, Misty's story was all they had. At 3:00 a.m., Misty said she rose to use the bathroom. Curiously, she bypassed the small bathroom connected to the bedroom and instead walked through the dark trailer to the guest bathroom at the far end. Her explanation, she didn't want to wake the children, struck detectives as odd. As she passed through the kitchen, she noticed the overhead light blazing. She swore she had turned it off hours earlier. Then she saw it, the back door wide open, held in place by a brick so it wouldn't slam shut in the night wind. She froze. Her heart pounded as she rushed back to the bedroom. The sight was seared into her mind forever, her younger charge sleeping peacefully, Aria's small space on the mattress disturbingly empty. Aria Bennett was gone. Brookdale was a town that rarely made headlines. Nestled deep in the state of Riverside, it sprawled along the banks of a winding river surrounded by cypress trees and thick wetlands. By day, the town smelled faintly of salt and wood smoke. By night, the fog rolled in from the marshes, muffling sounds and cloaking everything in a damp haze. There were 2 Brookdales. The first was the small cluster of well-kept houses near the main highway where lawns were trimmed and porch lights burned warmly. This was where the county officials, teachers, and shop owners lived. The second Brookdale stretched down unpaved roads into the marsh. Here, homes sagged under peeling paint trailers tilted slightly on uneven ground, and poverty hung like a heavy mist. The Bennett family belonged to the latter Brookdale. Ethan worked grueling hours at the docks loading freight into ships that disappeared into the horizon. Misty came from the same world, drifting between relatives' homes, often vanishing for days at a time. In places like this, children like Aria often slipped through the cracks. There were no private detectives, no constant media attention. When tragedy struck, the noise faded quickly, leaving only a whisper among the reeds and river currents. Before she vanished, Aria's life had moments of brightness that shone all the more fiercely against the darkness around her. To her grandmother, Nora Whitfield, Aria was the very embodiment of hope. The little girl loved to twirl in the kitchen while Nora played gospel music from a battered CD player. "Play my God music, Nana," she would say, her eyes wide with delight. That phrase became a ritual, a bond between them. Nora kept a small collection of Aria's drawings taped to the refrigerator stick figures with big, happy smiles and houses that always seemed to have oversized windows, as if Aria longed for more light to come in. She had a way of making even the most ordinary days feel like adventures. At school, she had a best friend named Alyssa, and together they invented stories about magical forests and secret kingdoms. But there were shadows. Nora noticed the days when Aria came to her house quiet and withdrawn, or when Misty's moods shifted unpredictably. She worried about Ethan's long hours and Misty's erratic behavior. More than once, Nora had thought of calling child services again. But in Brookdale, help was slow, and hope was fragile. She never imagined how quickly it could all be shattered. Years before the night Aria vanished, Brookdale had already set the stage for tragedy. Ethan Bennett was just 23 when he met Lila Summers, a girl barely 14 hanging around the docks after school. Lila was fragile and wild, drawn to Ethan's rough charisma and the thrill of someone older paying attention. By the time her parents realized how serious things had become, she had already dropped out of school and moved into Ethan's small trailer on the edge of the marsh. When Aria was born 2 years later, the doctors warned that the baby might not survive. She was small, with a heart condition that required constant monitoring. Against the odds, Aria grew stronger. Nora called her a miracle, a gift sent to light up their dark lives. But miracles alone could not hold a family together. Lila struggled with the crushing weight of motherhood while still a child herself. Ethan worked long hours to keep food on the table while tensions at home escalated. By the time Aria turned 3, Lila had begun disappearing for days at a time, lost to substances and to her own despair. One night, she left and never came back. The weight of raising 2 children fell entirely on Ethan's weary shoulders. With Lila gone, child services stepped in. At first, they considered removing Aria and her younger brother from Ethan's care. But Ethan convinced them otherwise. He presented himself as a hard-working father doing his best. He attended every required meeting, nodded through parenting classes, and cleaned the trailer just enough for visits. It was easier for the overworked caseworkers to let the children stay than to place them in foster care. The file was marked low risk and quietly shelved. Nora saw the cracks no one else wanted to see. She worried about Ethan's temper, about the long stretches when he worked nights and left the children in the care of whoever was available. She reported her concerns more than once, but the system moved slowly. Each time someone would show up, ask questions, then disappear again, leaving Nora with the same gnawing dread. When Ethan met Misty Ward, a drifter barely 17, Nora's alarms grew louder. Misty had no stable home, no experience caring for children. She carried her own scars, emotional wounds no one could see but everyone could feel. Still, no one stopped Ethan from bringing Misty into the house. No one intervened before it was too late. Misty appeared in their lives quietly like a shadow slipping through a half-open door. She met Ethan at a bus stop where he dropped Aria off for kindergarten. She was rail-thin with hollow eyes and a voice that wavered between defiance and fear. Ethan saw in her someone who needed saving, or perhaps someone who made him feel less alone. Within weeks, she had moved into the trailer, sleeping in the same cramped room as the children. She became their caretaker by default, watching them while Ethan labored at the docks overnight. But Misty was unreliable. Some nights she would vanish without explanation, returning days later with shaky apologies and promises to change. Ethan would rage, throwing her belongings into the yard only to let her back inside by morning. Nora began visiting almost every evening under the pretense of bringing dinner. In truth, she came to make sure Aria and her brother were safe. She saw the way Misty stared blankly at the children as if they were burdens she didn't know how to carry. Nora's fear grew sharper with each passing day, but she never imagined how quickly it would all come to a breaking point. The day before Aria disappeared began like any other. The February air carried a damp chill as Ethan prepared for his night shift. Aria clung to his leg, not wanting him to leave. He promised he'd be back before sunrise, that they would have pancakes together in the morning. Misty seemed unusually quiet that evening. She kept her eyes down as Nora dropped by to deliver a bag of groceries. Nora noticed the tension immediately, the way Misty's hands trembled as she folded laundry, the way Ethan avoided looking at her. As the sun sank behind the cypress trees, Nora hugged Aria tightly. "Be good for Daddy," she whispered, kissing her granddaughter's cheek. Aria giggled and said, "Play my God music when I come back tomorrow, Nana." Nora's heart ached at the innocence in those words. Later, Ethan left for work, locking the back door carefully. Misty sat silently on the couch, staring at the flickering glow of the television. By the time Nora drove away down the gravel road, the house looked calm from the outside. Inside, however, storm clouds were gathering. It was the last time anyone outside that house saw Aria alive. Please remember to subscribe and share these stories. Each subscription helps bring attention to children like Aria, whose voices might otherwise be lost. The timeline of that night became the cornerstone of the investigation. Misty told officers she discovered Aria missing at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. But she did not call Ethan or emergency services until 27 minutes later. In a home so small, it should have taken no more than a few minutes to check every corner, every closet, every shadow where a frightened child might hide. 27 minutes was a lifetime. Investigators painstakingly reconstructed those missing moments. According to Misty, she had risen from her mattress to use the bathroom. Instead of using the small bathroom connected to the bedroom, she walked through the darkened trailer to the guest bathroom at the far end. That choice alone struck them as peculiar. Why move through the house, leaving 2 small children alone in the middle of the night? As she passed through the kitchen, she said she noticed the light burning brightly and the back door wide open. A brick had been wedged beneath it to keep it from slamming shut in the wind. Rather than calling for help immediately, Misty claimed she rushed back to check the bedroom. There she found Aria gone, while Aria's younger brother slept peacefully untouched by the chaos around him. What Misty did during those 27 minutes would haunt the case for years to come. When investigators arrived, they expected signs of a break-in, perhaps a struggle, some evidence that an intruder had forced their way inside. Instead, they found stillness. The back door lock was intact, showing no damage or tampering. The brick propping it open was traced to a small pile inside the laundry room, meaning it had been taken from within the house, not outside. 2 carefully balanced stacks of laundry stood untouched in that same room. Detectives noted that if someone had carried a sleeping child through there in the dark, they would have almost certainly knocked the stacks over. The fact that they remained perfectly upright suggested no hurried escape. In the bedroom, there was another troubling clue. Misty had insisted that Aria went to bed wearing her favorite pink nightshirt. Yet, during the search, officers discovered that very garment in the dirty laundry basket. When confronted, Misty simply changed her story. She claimed she had confused the nights, that perhaps Aria had worn something different after all. To seasoned detectives, this shifting narrative was as loud as a scream. The house had no signs of forced entry. No evidence of an outsider's hand. Whatever had happened to Aria had begun and ended inside those 4 walls. Misty's statements evolved like smoke, twisting and reshaping with every question. At first, she said the children had been asleep by 8 o'clock. Later that time changed to 10, then 10:30. She described lying down beside Aria on the same mattress, only to later claim she had slept separately a few feet away. Her account of the evening became a puzzle with missing pieces. Each interview added contradictions rather than clarity. Holden, the lead investigator, grew increasingly convinced that Misty was hiding something. He decided to administer a polygraph test. Misty agreed, perhaps believing she could control her own nerves, perhaps underestimating the precision of the machine. The results were devastating. On 3 crucial questions. Did she know what happened to Aria? Was she hiding information about the disappearance? Did she know where Aria was now? Misty registered a near certainty of deception. The test was repeated on different machines with different operators on different days. Each time the outcome was the same deception, clear and undeniable. To Holden, this was confirmation of his deepest suspicion. Misty was lying, and somewhere beneath those lies was the truth about what happened to 5-year-old Aria Bennett. As days turned into weeks, Brookdale transformed. Search parties swept through the marshes, dogs combed the riverbanks, and helicopters circled overhead, their blades scattering flocks of startled birds. Volunteers waded through waist-deep water, calling Aria's name into the heavy air. At first, the community rallied. Neighbors donated supplies, strangers arrived to help. Local news stations broadcast updates every hour. Nora clung to hope, clutching Aria's drawings in trembling hands. But hope has a half-life. As the search dragged on without results, the crowds thinned. The news crews packed up and moved on to fresher stories. The reward money stopped growing. Only a handful of dedicated officers and Nora remained relentless. Misty, meanwhile, moved through the days like a ghost. She appeared at vigils, her face blank, answering questions with clipped, emotionless words. Whispers began to circulate. Some said Misty was a victim of circumstance too young and traumatized to react normally. Others believed she was guilty, hiding behind a mask of numbness. The tension in town simmered dangerously. Even as the case consumed headlines, a sense of fatigue settled in. And with fatigue came silence, the same silence that had allowed Aria to slip through the cracks long before she disappeared. Exactly 1 month after Aria's disappearance, the town was stunned again. Ethan Bennett and Misty Ward were married in a private ceremony inside the very trailer where Aria had last been seen. The decision ignited outrage. To many, it was an incomprehensible act of betrayal. Why would a grieving father marry the prime suspect in his daughter's disappearance? Why would a young woman, barely 17, agree to bind herself to a man under such scrutiny? Holden understood the legal implications immediately. Under state law, a spouse cannot be compelled to testify against their partner. By marrying Misty, Ethan had ensured she could never be forced to reveal what she knew, even if the truth might condemn him. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed as Ethan and Misty emerged hand in hand, their expressions unreadable. Nora refused to attend, locking herself inside her house with Aria's belongings, praying for strength. For Holden, the wedding confirmed his worst fears. This was not just about a missing child. This was about 2 people bound together by a secret so dark they would rather live in a prison of lies than face the light of truth. Subscribe to stay connected as we uncover these stories. Together, we can protect children and bring justice to those without a voice. When the pressure on Misty reached its peak, her story suddenly changed. She told investigators that on the night Aria vanished, 2 men had come to the trailer, her brother Tom Ward and her cousin Joe Overton. She claimed they had been drinking, restless and angry, looking for trouble. According to Misty, they were searching for Ethan's handgun, which he sometimes kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard. When they couldn't find it, Misty said they turned their fury on Aria. In her new version of events, Joe had carried the sleeping child out of the house, wrapping her in a black trash bag, while Misty cowered under a blanket, too terrified to intervene. She painted herself as a helpless bystander, frozen by fear, unable to scream or run for help. Holden listened carefully, his jaw tightening with every word. The story was dramatic, even cinematic, but something about it felt wrong. It was too neat, too conveniently timed to appear just as public suspicion was closing in on Misty herself. Investigators immediately began checking Joe's alibi. That night, Joe had been stopped at a police checkpoint miles away from the trailer. The officers who spoke to him remembered clearly he was calm, sober, and cooperative. They searched his vehicle thoroughly. There was no sign of Aria, no evidence of a struggle. Joe's location was further confirmed by cell tower records and witness testimony. Misty's dramatic tale unraveled within days, leaving her credibility in tatters. While the official investigation stalled Nora, Whitfield refused to surrender to despair. Each morning she packed a small bag with bottled water, snacks, and a flashlight, then set out alone into the marshes surrounding Brookdale. She waded through knee-deep water, pushing past reeds and cypress roots, calling Aria's name into the mist. Sometimes she imagined she heard a faint reply carried by the wind. Each time, her heart would leap only to crash when she realized it was nothing but the echo of her own hope. The police had long since scaled back their efforts. What began as a massive search had dwindled to a few tired officers marking off maps in a back room. Holden continued to work the case quietly, but resources were scarce and leads were evaporating. At home, Nora kept Aria's room exactly as it had been. Her drawings still lined the refrigerator door. A pair of tiny shoes sat neatly by the bed. Nora would sit for hours in the rocking chair, clutching one of Aria's small blankets to her chest, rocking back and forth, whispering prayers into the silence. People told her to rest, to let go, to accept that Aria might never return. But Nora could not. As long as there was breath in her body, she would search. Even if she had to walk every inch of Brookdale's dark, endless marshes alone. In the early weeks after Aria's disappearance, the town had been a whirlwind of activity. Posters were taped to every lamppost, search parties organized daily, and local businesses donated supplies. Strangers brought food and blankets to the Bennett's trailer. For a brief moment, Brookdale had felt united by a single purpose: bringing Aria home. But time eroded even the strongest resolve. As weeks passed without progress, volunteers began drifting away. The posters faded in the sun and rain, their corners curling and tearing. The once bustling search headquarters became eerily quiet. The media moved on to other stories. National news crews packed up their cameras, leaving behind only a few local reporters whose coverage grew thinner each day. Without constant attention, donations slowed to a trickle. The reward fund barely grew, its modest total no longer enough to draw fresh leads. Even Ethan withdrew, disappearing into his night shifts and rarely speaking to anyone. Misty remained in the trailer, her face blank, her silence becoming its own kind of answer. Nora felt the loss of momentum like a physical weight. She knew that with every passing day, Aria's name slipped further from people's minds. The world was forgetting her granddaughter, and that forgetting felt like a second death, a quieter, crueler one. As winter gave way to spring, Brookdale returned to its normal rhythms. Only Nora and Holden still carried the storm inside them. Nearly a year after Aria's disappearance, with the investigation stalled and the trail cold, a surprising development jolted Brookdale. Ethan Bennett, Misty Ward, and Misty's brother Tom were arrested in a sting operation involving prescription painkillers. For months, undercover officers had purchased small amounts of oxycodone and hydrocodone from various locals. The transactions were minor, 10 here, 20 there, amounting to barely a few $1,000s in total. Under normal circumstances, such offenses would have resulted in a few years behind bars at most, perhaps even probation for first-time offenders. But this was not a normal case. To the public, it seemed like a routine drug bust. To Holden and those closest to the investigation, it was something more, a chance to pressure Misty into revealing what she knew about Aria. When the sentences were handed down, jaws dropped across the county. Misty received 25 years, the maximum possible for her charges. Ethan and Tom each received 15. The message was clear, though no one would admit it openly. This wasn't just about pills. It was a calculated move to break Misty's silence, to trap her in a cell until the truth clawed its way out. Brookdale buzzed with whispers. Some called it justice. Others called it desperation. Misty's first weeks in prison were spent in near total isolation. She rarely spoke to anyone, keeping her head down, moving through her days like a shadow. Holden visited her several times, hoping to extract even the smallest clue about Aria. Each time, Misty stared at him with hollow eyes, saying nothing. He offered her deals, reductions in her sentence, even a transfer to a safer facility. She remained unmoved. To the outside world, Misty's silence became its own confession. News commentators speculated endlessly. Was she protecting someone, hiding from guilt? Or had she simply accepted that speaking the truth would destroy her forever? For Holden, the silence was maddening. He replayed every detail of the case in his mind late into the night. The open door, the brick, the 27 missing minutes. Each unanswered question circled like vultures over a carcass. Meanwhile, Nora visited Misty once, standing behind the glass in the visitation room. She begged her to tell the truth, to bring Aria home, to give the family some measure of peace. Misty lowered her head and refused to meet Nora's eyes. It was then Nora understood Misty would rather spend a quarter of her life in a cell than reveal the secret buried in Brookdale's marshes. 15 years passed. The world moved on, but for Nora and Holden, time stood still. One humid summer evening, Holden received a call from a prison counselor. A new inmate. A woman with a history of addiction claimed she had heard something disturbing from Misty during a sleepless night in the cell block. According to the woman, Misty had spoken in a low, trembling voice as if caught between memory and nightmare. She said Misty confessed she hadn't meant to hurt Aria. She just wouldn't stop crying, Misty reportedly whispered. She wanted her daddy. I just wanted her to be quiet for a little while. The counselor couldn't confirm whether the account was reliable. Prison rumors were common, and desperation could breed fabrication. But for Holden, it was enough to reignite the dying embers of the case. He requested the audio recordings from that night. The tapes captured only faint murmurs muffled by distance and static, but one phrase stood out with chilling clarity. Not to hurt her, never to hurt her. Holden felt a surge of cold resolve. This was the first new lead in years. Whatever truth Misty carried, it was beginning to seep through the cracks of her silence. Holden returned to the evidence room, a cramped space filled with boxes marked with faded case numbers. Dust coated every surface like a layer of time itself. He opened the worn box labeled Aria Bennett and began examining each piece with fresh eyes. Most of it was familiar photographs of the trailer diagrams of the floor plan logs of search routes through the marsh. But one item caught his attention, a pillowcase with a faint frayed length of fabric tied loosely around it. It had been collected from beneath Aria's mattress during the initial search, but dismissed as insignificant. Now combined with Misty's whispered words. It suggested something darker. The pattern of fibers hinted at a makeshift restraint, perhaps used in panic rather than planning. As Holden studied the pillowcase, another overlooked detail surfaced in his mind. In the phone records, there had been a missing call from Ethan's cell at 3:05 a.m., exactly within the 27-minute window. At the time, it had been dismissed as an error. Now it felt like a thread waiting to be pulled. Holden's pulse quickened. The case was no longer just about Misty. Ethan's shadow was stretching over that night, long and dark. The room was quiet enough to hear the air vent ticking. Misty sat with her hands folded, the pale cuffs of a prison-issue sweater hiding the tremor in her wrists. Holden placed the pillowcase on the table, its threadbare ribbon of fabric catching the light. He said very little. He had learned that silence had a way of drawing the truth out like a tide. Time thinned. Misty's gaze sank to the frayed cloth. For years she had built walls within herself, narrow corridors of denial leading to locked doors. Now, in the fluorescent hush of an interview room, the weight of years pressed against those doors until something gave way. She spoke not as a performance and not for mercy, but as if the words were objects too heavy to carry any longer. She said the night had been ordinary until it wasn't. Aria had woken crying, asking for her father with the unwavering insistence of a child. The sound threaded through Misty's nerves, fraying them. She was exhausted, unmoored, and frightened of losing the fragile approval she believed Ethan had granted her. She swore she never intended harm. She only wanted quiet. She tied the fabric loosely just for a moment, just long enough to calm the storm, just long enough to promise herself she would make it right. The room did not move. The clock did not rush to rescue her. She said panic followed the way a shadow follows the body that makes it. When she realized Aria had gone, still nothing in the world remained where it had been. She hid the child for minutes that felt like a season, then stumbled through the house in a daze to build a picture that would absolve her. A light left on a door, propped open, a brick pulled from inside, as if some stranger had reached in from the night and taken what was most loved. Holden wrote in clean, measured lines, and when he looked up, there wasn't triumph in his face, only a patient sorrow. He asked where Aria had been taken. Misty described the small aluminum skiff tethered near the reeds, the oarlocks that squealed the way fog gathers low over the water until the river wears a veil. She carried the child out, she said, and the marsh accepted its secret. She turned her face away as she told it, as though even memory could wound. It sounded like confession because it was. The first ascent crested there, and for a moment the town's long nightmare felt like it might finally wake. But Holden had learned to distrust the clean edges of relief. Truth arrives in parts, not wholes, and it leaves shadows where it passes. On his desk lay the other piece. The 3:05 a.m. call logged, vanished, and inexplicable. He laid that number beside the pillowcase and Misty's account, and the picture shifted. He reconstructed the night as a map of movements, Ethan leaving at dusk, the house falling into its ritual stillness, the spike of noise at 3, the unspooling fabric of 27 impossible minutes. In that gap, there was room for another presence, one not invented, but returning. A man at the docks can steal half an hour from a shift with the ease of long practice. The road from the harbor to the trailer is short, and the night is generous to those who need to pass unseen. Holden went back through phone records, employment logs, and the jittering timestamp of a rusted security camera that caught only angles of light. Piece by piece, it gave way. Ethan had broken his own routine that night. He had driven home between loads. He had stepped into the kitchen while the bulb still burned, while panic had already struck and calcified. He had seen what Misty had done. And then, with a calculus driven not by malice but by terror, he had chosen a path that bent the world away from truth. It was a quiet revelation, the kind that changes everything without raising its voice. When Holden confronted him, there were no speeches and no shouting. A man's face simply empties when the scaffolding of a lie is removed. Ethan did not deny that he returned. He did not claim intervention or heroism. He admitted only to rearrangement, to lifting, to carrying, to the grim practicality of building a story that would protect what remained of his life. He would not accuse Misty, and she would not accuse him. Their pact had been sealed long before the wedding bands ever were. The second ascent was steeper, sharper. The town had asked for a villain and received a mirror. It is harder to forgive a cowardice that we recognize as human. The marsh had a way of keeping time that people did not. Teams launched small boats at dawn, the water the color of pewter, the air heavy with the ache of summer. Sonar traced pale, fan-shaped images along the riverbed. Divers descended into a world where sound turns inward, where silt rises at a touch like ghosts startled from sleep. When they found her, it was not spectacle. It was the plain, sacred work of recovery. A small shape, the measurement of a life interrupted. Fibers that matched the ribbon on the pillowcase. Enough to say what needed saying without cruelty, enough to lift the burden of doubt from a grandmother's shoulders. Nora stood on the bank in a dark dress that the wind worried at the hem. She did not wail. Grief had traveled too far inside her to need volume. She held a small pair of shoes to her chest and watched the river return what it had kept. Somewhere in the hush, she imagined a familiar melody. The gospel hymn Aria had claimed as her own, threading from memory into air. A kindness the world had not earned but still received. Proceedings followed. There were hearings and verdicts, and words in solemn rooms meant to place lives on scales. Misty, already buried beneath years, received a sentence that acknowledged intense absence but not consequence as enormity. Ethan was held to account for the lie that reshaped the night for the rearrangement of facts that sent an entire town in the wrong direction for so long. Holden said only what could be proven. He did not need to say more. In Brookdale, the posters finally came down. Not because forgetting had won, but because certainty had arrived. In Nora's kitchen drawings remained on the refrigerator windows wide to a difficult light. She played the old CD soft enough that the music could pass for breathing. It was a ritual, and rituals teach the living how to stay. The story does not return what it takes. But truth, when it finally comes, is a kind of harbor. It keeps the small boats of memory from drifting into storms. And there, on a morning that belonged to no season, Brookdale stood very still and learned how to be a town again.